The title of my talk is Addressing Intimate Partner Violence, or IPV, in Substance Use Treatment Services, a Missed Opportunity. I'm Gail Gilchrist. I'm a professor in Addictions Healthcare Research at King's College London. It's me presenting today. I'm presenting on behalf of the wider team, who you can see on this slide. And much of the findings that I'll be presenting today come from our programme grant, Programme Advancing Theory and Treatment Approaches for Men in Substance Use Treatment who perpetrate intimate partner violence. And that 6-year programme of research was funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research in the UK. I would like to give specific acknowledgement to Professor Liz Gilchrist, who's a chair in psychological therapies at the University of Edinburgh. Just to say that although we share the same surname, we are not related. Liz is the clinical lead on Advance, and she led the development of our Advanced Perpetrator Programme, so she deserves a special mention. Liz is a forensic psychologist, and she's been working in both academia and practice for around 40 years, in courts, the police stations, in prison, probation, victim support, and also social work. Unfortunately, it's possible that some people watching this presentation will have experienced or be experiencing or impacted by intimate partner violence, either now or in the past. Therefore, I wanted to give people an advance warning that this presentation contains scenes and direct quotes of intimate partner violence and abuse, which might be distressing. So I've included some helpline numbers and urge people to look after themselves and to reach out if they require support. So I'm going to start off by looking at the prevalence and the impact of intimate partner violence. So what do I mean when I talk about intimate partner violence or domestic abuse? I mean much more than physical violence, which all too often is the only thing people think about when they hear those terms. We're looking at psychological, sexual, emotional, financial abuse, coercive controlling behaviours, stalking behaviours, and also technology facilitated abuse. In Australia, we know that intimate partner violence affects in their lifetimes, around 1 in 4 women and 1 in 14 men. And we know that the rates among Aboriginal women are 3 times higher than among non-Aboriginal women. And rates among transgender and non-binary people are potentially even higher. But while everyone can experience intimate partner violence, we know that 75% of victims and survivors in Australia are women, and 75% of perpetrators are men. We know that women are more likely to experience sexual violence and injury from a partner than men are. So data from Australia suggests that 1 woman is killed every 11 days, compared to 1 man every 91 days. And then if we look at alcohol in the data from Australia, alcohol is implicated in around 65% of police-reported domestic and family violence incidents, and it also contributes to around 47% of child protection cases. So the reason that we're looking at this work is that we know intimate partner violence negatively impacts the lives of victims and survivors. It impacts negatively the physical, mental, sexual and reproductive health of women. It also impacts the lives and futures of children who witness it, and often results in them being more likely to be abusive in their adult lives. And although this presentation and the work that we do focuses on behaviour change of men who perpetrate violence and who use substances, the overall goal is to improve the outcomes and lives and impact for women who experience intimate partner violence and their children. So my research in this field began right back with my PhD in the 90s, where I was looking at comorbidity and violence among female alcohol and drug users in and out of treatment. And the proportion of women who experience intimate partner violence is about 7 times greater for women in substance use treatment than it is for women in the general population. And when we look at women who inject drugs, it's 9 times greater than for women in the general population. We looked at risk factors for experiencing intimate partner violence for women who were in or engaged in substance use treatment in Barcelona a decade or so ago. And along with all the usual risk factors, you can see that women who lived with a substance user were 4 times greater likelihood of experiencing intimate partner violence. Partner violence negatively impacts the health and well-being of all victims and survivors, including those who use alcohol and drugs. It can lead to trauma and other mental health outcomes, and women may use substances to cope. Moreover, research has shown that intimate partner violence impedes substance use treatment, engagement and completion, and also increases women's likelihood of relapse. And this may be to do with, in some cases, partners might coerce women to return to substance use or to use substances, or they may interfere with women's ability to access or to stay engaged in substance use treatment. And given that about 40% of women in substance use treatment are cohabiting or married, many to men who also use substances, as well as offering support to women, it's vital to address men's abusive behaviour. We know the impact of IPV on women who use substances also increases their risk of homelessness and increases the likelihood of child protection involvement. So it's time to change the narrative. Instead of saying, if it's that bad, why doesn't she just leave him? What we should be asking instead is, why doesn't he change? And the main reason that women, either return or don't leave abusive partners is because they want to try and work things out. And this is from the Domestic Abuse Perpetrator Strategy Call to Action for England and Wales. And there is a need for safe, effective perpetrator interventions alongside funded services for victims and survivors and children. But certainly in the UK, not everyone that needs support or behaviour change interventions has access to them. And I'm not sure if coverage in Australia is better. Moreover, we know that leaving a relationship is a risk factor for domestic violence homicides, with 75% of women who are killed in domestic violence homicides being murdered after they leave or when they're in the process of leaving. And there's some data here from the ABS in 2023 that says of the women in Australia who moved away during a temporary separation, 1 in 13 experienced violence for the first time, 1 in 4 continued to experience violence, and 1 in 7 experienced increased violence. And in Australia, over 60% of men who killed a female intimate partner were engaging in problematic drug or alcohol use in the lead up to the homicide or at the time of the homicide. So I now want to move on to look at the role of substance use in intimate partner violence perpetration. While no single factor explains why some men perpetrate intimate partner violence, we know that substance use, especially abuse and dependence, are strongly and consistently associated with intimate partner violence perpetration and with more severe violence. Our research that we did in substance use treatment, community substance use treatment settings in England, we found that 4 in 10 men had perpetrated IPV in the past year, and that's around 4 times higher than among studies of men in the general population. We also know that men with substance use disorders are about 7 or 8 times more likely to be arrested for intimate partner violence, and they're also more likely to reoffend. And as we've spoken, substance use features in around half of all domestic homicides. Men with alcohol and drug problems have elevated prevalence of well-established known risk factors for intimate partner violence perpetration. And our work again in substance use treatment in England demonstrates this. So men have a much higher prevalence of childhood abuse, witnessing interparental abuse, general violence, drinking and mental health issues. But in a systematic review that we've recently completed, they also had higher histories of trauma, mental health, clinical symptomatology, poor executive functioning, housing problems, poor social support. And so all of these factors may go some way to explaining the higher prevalence. But we really wanted to, to better understand those dynamics of domestic abuse and drug and alcohol use. So what role did substance use play in that abuse? So we conducted a meta-ethnography, so a qualitative review of qualitative studies, and we also conducted interviews with men in substance use treatment, and then we also interviewed separately their current or ex-partners. So we had 14 dyads, and we used the findings from this research to inform key areas for our advanced perpetrator program intervention development. So here you can see the similarities and also the differences in men and their partners' explanations of his abusive behaviour. So men tended to describe intimate partner violence as a one-off, sort of arising from a specific dispute or a perceived sexual betrayal, whereas women described a pattern of abusive behaviour and sexual jealousy. Women also described abuse linked to uncovering men's secret substance use, or if they had relapsed to substance use and not shared that. Men often described their behaviour as protective, whereas partners described the same experience as controlling and overbearing. So our qualitative research and our meta-ethnography found that men's substance use was linked with their use of abusive behaviour, including when intoxicated, so alcohol, it brings out the worst in me, when craving or withdrawals, I was agitated, I needed something, and also when acquiring substances, so the need to get money, to get straight, or also the financial abuse that came with that. But substance use was rarely the only explanation for intimate partner violence. It was linked with sexual jealousy, as I said, but also with men's perceptions of women behaving improperly and opposing male authority, sometimes, but not always, in the context of alcohol or drug use. So the purple quotes are women, and the green ones are men. So in purple here, you can say, she says, things just started getting physical. He started getting really controlling. If he didn't like what I did, he'd hit me. If he'd been drinking, I think he'd been drinking the night before because he'd been on cocaine. So he got really paranoid, saying I'd been seeing people, and he just started hitting me. And then, the quote on the left, the guy sort of justifies his behaviour. Well, if I've had a drink and her ex-boyfriend texts her, I fly off the handle and start punching doors. And then in the final quote, it's nothing to do with alcohol or drug use at all. So this guy says, when she goes to the pub and says she's going there with her family, I used to actually go there and see if she is there with the family, like she's not lying to me. And if it's not the family, I go into the pub, I pull her out the pub, I give her a smack, I put her in the car, and I take her home. But it was always, or often, quite difficult to separate the effects of intoxication from controlling behaviours, where men perceived that women had behaved improperly, and the way they therefore sort of justified that their behaviour as a result of these perceived improprieties. So in this particular couple here, which is Lucas and Bianca, they are telling the same story, but they're telling it very differently. So first of all, Lucas, he'd been in, he says he's had a drink, but not a lot. But I had a drink, and his 4 kids had been out with their mum, and they come back at night, and his oldest son says, oh, we've been to the pub, and he says he just flipped, and I didn't slap her, pushed her away, I'm going to bed. And he describes that he went to get his tobacco, tripped over the rug, fell on her, head butted her, then she told me to leave. Whereas Bianca says, when she got back from the pub, she could tell that he was intoxicated. He went to bed, but he came back down 10 minutes later and kept going with the argument and the shouting. She said, look, go to bed and we'll talk about it tomorrow. He headbutted me and he slapped me across the face. So we, with the 14 dyads, so the men and their female partners, we identified sort of 3 distinct relationship dynamics, and we tried to ensure that the videos throughout the intervention, addressed that. So one where the victim had never been substance dependent, and that was a sort of narrative of insecurity and irrationality. She wasn't aware, she was confused and unaware of his drug use and questioned his behaviour. Another group where the victim was desisting from substance use, so the couple had started off understanding that there was a shared understanding and connection over their substance use, which was lost over time. So that narrative of mutual struggle against drug dependency and intimacy lost. And finally, the third group where the victim was substance dependent as well. And women in this group were more likely to describe mixed feelings towards their partner of love and hatred, but they wanted to gain more out of that relationship. It was more, transactional, so somewhere to stay, financial payback, protection, drugs, etc. And women who were substance dependent were particularly vulnerable to stay in those abusive relationships. There was a high prevalence of trauma and complex needs in couples where both were using. So as I say, we used those narratives from these dynamics to develop our exercises and videos in the context of our intervention. We also looked at men's, so we had 37 men that we interviewed. We also tried to develop a sort of pathways model, so not quite typologies because we still have to test it, but a descriptive model of the pathways between substance use and intimate partner violence perpetrators. So we interviewed, as I say, 37 men in substance use treatment who were IPV perpetrators, and we tried to explore their trajectories into intimate partner violence to identify areas for intervention. So men were grouped into these 3 distinct pathways, and across these groupings, men's childhood and early experiences led to different pathways into intimate partner violence, and each pathway presented differently with varying core features. For example, core features of generalized violence, mental health or jealousy, and different predisposing background factors, including types and timing of childhood abuse and trauma. So if we start off with the entrenched substance use pathways, substance use and IPV were highly interlinked, and this group experienced early trauma and early onset of substance use, which led to this entrenched substance using lifestyle, often portrayed as unstable or chaotic. And men in this group had trauma and emotional dysregulation at the root of both their substance use and abusive behaviours, and they used substances to help them deal with previous traumas. And for men in this grouping, a sort of focused intervention would be needed to regulate emotions, so the trauma that they had experienced and their use of substances to cope. Moving on to look at men in the relationship insecurity pathway, they reported later trauma, so bereavement, relationship breakdown, following what they described as sort of loving or happy childhoods. Substance use was originally represented as recreational rather than problematic while they were in their relationships, and they had mostly stable lifestyles. So they had jobs, they had somewhere to live, good support networks. So they had these protective factors in place. But problematic substance use increased when those protective factors were threatened or temporarily absent. So men in this grouping reported incidents of abuse linked to insecurity, sexual jealousy, and these became heightened when substance use was involved. And from men's accounts, it would appear that the removal of the substance use behaviour or increasing coping skills for them and promotion of general protective factors such as employment could be likely to lower the risk of IPV. And the men in this group may require a less intensive and more focused intervention than in other groups. And the final group is the rule-breaking pathway, and in this group men had childhood exposure to physical and emotional abuse in predominantly male dominant households, and that led to a need to have, control and power in their own adult lives. And this need was expressed through, rule-breaking behaviours such as substance use and antisocial behaviours. And I guess a critical finding of this group was that they discussed their IPV incidents in isolation of substance use, and they discussed general violence to others regardless of gender. And it might be this group of men that require the most intensive intervention to rescript childhood experiences that led to these unhelpful schemas, enhancing distress tolerance and self-regulation, and a kind of reframing automatic cognitions linked to the need to control violence and male entitlement towards women. So we've tried to sort of pull everything together and look at the implications for our intervention when we were developing it. So definitely the need to integrate all of those things together. So, there's a definite need. All of those seeking help or support for intimate partner violence had experienced trauma. So it was paramount that the intervention was trauma informed, to take account of people's pasts. As I said, many have experienced abuse in childhood, and that leads to poor coping, avoidant strategies, the use of self-medication or drugs to self-medicate to cope. And, so there's a need for, especially in that entrenched substance use pathway, to develop emotional regulation and coping skills. And then for those who experience trauma in adolescence, they had a sort of the loss of protective factors resulted in their substance use moving from recreational to problematic. So we need to look at how we can reinstate those protective factors and address sexual jealousy. Substance use treatment on its own, or domestic abuse treatment on its own, isn't enough. We really need to individualise the interventions and focus on specific needs. We need to think about how to, change antisocial lifestyles, looking at sort of cost benefit of behaviours and incentivising change. So we use a lot of motivational interviewing, the use of sort of enlightened self-interest. And, interventions like this do require considerable skill and time if we're to lift people out of these situations. So where are we at the moment with interventions to reduce intimate partner violence? So there's a need for targeted perpetrator programs for men with substance use problems. Most, despite the higher prevalence of intimate partner violence perpetration among men in substance use treatment, most men are not referred to perpetrator programs. So there's a lack of referral pathways and a lack of protocols to undertake this work in substance use treatment. So maybe what needs to be done or could be done is to train staff in substance use treatment settings to better understand intimate partner violence perpetration in the context of substance use, but also train them to deliver perpetrator programs where men are at in substance use treatment settings. So that might be one solution, and that would also overcome the sector's lack of confidence in dealing with intimate partner violence perpetration in their routine work. And when men are referred, or men with substance use problems are referred to perpetrator programs, they're the ones who drop out or have poor attendance and high recidivism. We know that integrated interventions that address alcohol and drugs and IPV simultaneously show promise. And we know that from recent systematic reviews, incorporating substance abuse or trauma components to perpetrator interventions have shown the best results. We also know that perpetrator programs that include motivational strategies such as goal setting have been shown to increase attendance rates, treatment adherence, motivation for change, behavioural and attitudinal outcomes, and also to reduce dropout. So it's important that these components that we know work are incorporated into perpetrator programs for men with substance use problems. And the current sort of one-size-fits-all approach to perpetrator programs ignores individual differences that have been strongly linked with IPV, especially, substance use. So I hope I've convinced you that there's a need for tailored programs to target the risk factors for IPV and recidivism among men with substance use problems. So I want to now move on to discussing the advanced perpetrator programs that we have developed over the past few years. And how did we develop that evidence base? Well, we looked at what worked, but we also reviewed existing approaches and manuals. I've talked about our meta-ethnography review and our interviews with men in substance use treatment and their partners. We also worked very closely with people with lived experience or living experience of substance use and intimate partner violence. And we also set up a learning alliance of key stakeholders from both sectors to bring them together to work on finding solutions to this problem. Various theories were used to underpin the advanced D model. So feminist theory and intersectionality, trauma-informed, so we needed to include signs and symptoms of trauma in practice and avoid re-traumatizing and understanding where people or the experiences that people have had. We used personal goal planning or personal goal theory, so seeking fulfilling goals, intimacy over power, and I'll talk a bit more about that. We use self-regulation to enhance the capability of regulating people's own functioning. So that's different to emotional regulation. And again, I'll talk a bit more about that. And we used social information processing, identifying and challenging how people interpret and respond to information. And all of that sits within the nested ecological framework. So the advanced program is a strengths-based program. So it focuses on developing participants' strengths and developing healthy, non-abusive relationships. Two main models were used to enable behaviour change. So personal goal planning, and that was to work with individual SMART goals, which were pro-social, and to build genuine motivation to facilitate that change. And the self-regulation model, which refers to the ability to manage disruptive emotions and impulses, was also used. In advance, clients learn to build and practice self-regulation skills to manage themselves better. It targets individual risks for IPV, including substance use, poor emotional regulation, and poor stress coping. And it teaches men how to reduce these risks by promoting self-regulation, so the ability to alter a response or override a thought, feeling, or impulse. And on this table here, you can see, the model, and it's quite CBT or DBT, elements of DBT in it. So it starts off with an individual goal planning, goal setting sessions. So what is it that I want to achieve? And as I said, it has to be a pro-social goal, and that is worked on throughout the intervention. And then we look at, how do I achieve that? How do I change my behaviour? How, self-regulation. So the intervention very much starts off around understanding what abuse is, understanding my thinking, and giving men the skills and understanding, so the capability to understand their behaviour and make changes. And they look at behaviours and opportunity. They get opportunities to try out the new behaviours, and they work on their feelings and how to manage distress better. And throughout the intervention, as I said, we work with motivation. So why should I change? Why should I do this? And throughout the intervention, we look at how substance use impacts behaviour. So not just looking at intoxication, but looking at craving, withdrawal, acquiring substances, and lifestyle. So we have produced the following manuals for delivery of the intervention. So we have a theory manual, training manual, facilitator delivery. We also have partner support, integrated partner support workers who work alongside the facilitators of the Advanced D programme to manage risk. We also have an evaluation manual, and we provide integrity support, so a bit like program management or program management every 2 weeks, which is provided by a clinical lead. And as I said, we offer support to the female current or ex-partners of men receiving the advanced programme, and women don't have to take up the offer of support, but it is offered to them, and they have the opportunity to engage or to engage at a later date. And the importance of enhanced risk management, obviously we need people to be professionally trained in profiling of risk and vulnerability, and so the Be Safer is conducted with men by the facilitators, and the DASH, or the equivalent, is undertaken with the female partners. And the advanced programme is really for men who use substances who are low to moderate risk on the Be Safer. And we have 4 structured case management meetings between the facilitators and the women's support worker throughout the programme, but we also have weekly email correspondence to manage any risk that may occur. And we originally started off the Advanced Perpetrator Programme as a group programme. So it was 16 weeks long. It was delivered in substance use treatment settings by facilitators who were predominantly substance use workers who'd been trained in delivery. And it started off with 2 to 4 individual sessions to increase motivation for behaviour change, followed by 12 weekly group sessions. And after each group session, there was a telephone check-in with the person's key worker and a booster session at 20 weeks. So the Advanced Group Perpetrator Programme was adapted for digitally supported remote delivery during COVID out of necessity, but it was based on available evidence and best practice. And that would suggest that ICBT was more effective if it also included individual support. So we went for a blended model that included, similar to the original model, obviously the content and the models underpinning the advanced digital programme haven't changed. So there's still an individual goal setting session. Obviously all of this is post enhanced risk assessment. So there's an individual goal setting session, and then there are 7 fortnightly groups which can be delivered in person or online. And then there are 12 weekly website sessions, and these practice sessions build on what has been delivered in the groups, and it gives men the chance to practice what they're learning and try it out. And then there's also 12 weekly coaching calls, individual support, where the facilitator calls the man in the advanced group or the advanced programme to see how they're getting on with the materials, but also it's a relationship and a substance use check-in. And alongside the entire intervention, the current or ex-partners of men are also offered support similar to the group programme. So just to give you an idea, in a typical fortnight, there is 1 group session followed by a website practice session and a coaching call. And then in the second week, there would just be a website session and a coaching call. And as I said, there's a flexible delivery model. We always have 2 facilitators. So there's flexible delivery that can be online or it can be in person. This is just to give you an idea of what the website looks like. So these are the 12 website sessions that men complete. At the moment, the website sessions are available in 5 languages, so English, Polish, Romanian, Urdu and Punjabi. And when men log on, again, based on best evidence that about choices, based on health change and therapy, we know choice is important. So men get to choose from 1 of 3 digital coaches who guides them through the website sessions. They all have the same accent, but men can choose whoever they wish to be their coach throughout the. As I said earlier, we also developed a website for women the current or ex-partners of men in advance, so that they, they can see what men are doing in the group, obviously not men's responses, but they can see the types of things men are learning, or men are doing in the group, so that men are not privileged with information over the women. And women also have access to safety messages. You should never have to help him. Just because he's doing the program doesn't necessarily mean that he will change his behaviour, and that you are not responsible for changing his behaviour. I talked a little bit about the use of contingency management in our intervention. So when it was a in-person group, men received a small token voucher towards their pro-social goals that they had identified. So that could be, cinema vouchers, or vouchers for attending the gym, or passes for the gym, etc. But when we did the digital intervention, we knew that digital poverty and literacy were issues. So men were issued with a tablet and with data, and data was contingent on engagement and attendance. And if men engaged, they got a further month, and at the end of the intervention got to retain their tablet. And all women who were participating in the research or receiving support got a smartphone with 4 months data on it, regardless of how much they took part or not, just so that they were able to contact us in a safe way if they were required to do so. So I'll just briefly talk you through the evaluation of the advanced programme, both the group and the digital versions. So as I said, we originally started with a group programme, and we had 104 men from 3 sites in England for our feasibility randomised control trial. 54 received the intervention and 50 didn't, and all men continued to receive their usual treatment in community substance use settings. So that could be key worker sessions, group sessions, substitution therapy, and so on. So this diagram shows the standardised effect sizes for men at 16-week follow-up. And you can see for men in the advanced group treatment arm, there were improvements or reductions in IPV perpetration and in the use of controlling behaviours on the abusive behaviour inventory, so the ABI revised, and also the CBS. We used a sample of items from the controlling behaviour scale. So we conducted a feasibility study of the adapted, so the advanced digital, the blended intervention during COVID. And we delivered, or advanced D was delivered to 40 men in substance use treatment, 25 of whom were followed up at the end of the programme. And we recruited 21 of their current or ex-female partners to provide outcome data. And we offered them support. All partners were offered support, and we followed up 11 of them, managed to follow up 11 of them at the end of the programme. So by the end of the programme, we saw that men had taken accountability for their abusive behaviour. Normally at the start of a perpetrator programme, you'll hear things like, well, I haven't done anything wrong, she's as bad as me, it should be her that's here. We're as bad as each other type thing. And so, this man says, I realised that you can be abusive in tons of different ways, and some of my behaviour was abusive. I'd be very defensive or aggressive in the way that I said stuff, and you don't need that really. Of the sessions offered, 48% were completed, and that's similar to other programmes in substance use treatment. And it's slightly higher or comparable with the other few trials that have been undertaken in substance use treatment settings of perpetrator programmes, one in the States and one in the Netherlands. Men's self-report of abusive behaviour reduced, so the use of abusive behaviour, the use of controlling behaviours reduced, but obviously we only followed up 25 of 40 men. So if we assume those men we didn't follow up hadn't changed their behaviour, we're still looking at about 40% of men reducing their behaviour, their abusive behaviour. And what do men think of doing something online? I mean, where we're at now, sort of 3-4 years later, everyone is much more, like here I am now, online. So everyone is much more comfortable doing things online, much more used to it. So the feedback is also potentially of its time. So some men said that they found it much easier doing stuff from the house. It wasn't as daunting than travelling into a service, but others would have preferred to do things face to face and would have felt a little bit more engaged, they thought. Overall, everyone found the content really good, especially the videos, which stuck in their head a bit more. And they said it'd given them the tools to do things a bit different and stop things getting worse. So all of the exercises that men do on the website sessions, they can complete, and they have a toolbox where all of that information is stored online, so they can go back to things when they need to, even when the program is finished. And some men found the website sessions reinforced a lot of the messages that they were doing in the groups, which is great, because that was the, relearn, that was what the plan was. And they thought that the coaching calls were absolutely brilliant, especially when they were going through tough times. Having a one-to-one support was great, especially with what was going on in my life in real time, and I think it's invaluable. Although the intervention itself isn't a substance use intervention, it's a perpetrator program in the context of substance use. We did see reductions in substance using days or increase in alcohol and drug-free days. And again, that might be around, similar to the Good Lives model, which is, encompasses what we're doing. That if you change one domain in people's lives, it has a kind of knock-on effect in other areas of their life. So maybe as their relationships improved, or that their use of substances to cope may also have reduced. So we also, as I said, recruited women, because we want men's self-report to be corroborated by women. So we asked women about their views on being offered support. And many of these women without advance probably wouldn't have been offered support, and certainly the men wouldn't have been referred to perpetrator programs. So women, felt it was really nice just to have someone to talk to that didn't judge them. They felt it was, to be able to say that I do feel scared sometimes, to know that there is somebody that's checking up on me, asking if I feel okay, if I feel safe. It feels like I had backup. So some, but not all, women reported changes in their current or ex-partner's behaviours. So this woman says, we sit down and speak to each other and discuss it so we can work through it better. I do think his behaviour's changed, and I think it's because he's realised that not everybody in this world is perfect. Everybody does make mistakes. People do. Not everyone is going to feel exactly the same way he does and see things the way he does. I think it's opened his eyes that everyone has their own different feelings and opinions. It's not going to be like his rules, his regulations, and that I'm not one of the children, I'm an adult, and we're equal partners. So as I said, we also recruited men's female current or ex-partners, and 62% of the women that we recruited took up the offer of support, which is great. And although we only followed up a small sample, similarly we saw reductions, or they reported reductions, in the abusive behaviours and controlling behaviours that they had experienced. What are our key messages? Well, that Advance or Advanced D are targeted perpetrator programs, specifically for or to meet the needs of men with alcohol and drug problems, and those men are usually excluded from existing domestic abuse perpetrator programs due to their substance use. Attendance, we found, was comparable with other perpetrator programs for men that use substances. And while we have found reductions in abusive behaviour at the end of the intervention, we know that longer term follow-up with larger samples are required to explore whether these findings are maintained. So we have our funding, and we're currently recruiting to a large cluster randomised controlled trial of Advanced D in probation services or community justice, and that's we're looking to recruit 32 clusters and 450 men who are serving community sentences or on licence for intimate partner violence who have alcohol or drug use identified as a criminogenic need, and of course we'll also be offering support to the female partners of men who are in the advanced intervention arm, and men and women will be followed up for up to 2 years, 1 year in person and using other routine data. So hopefully we'll be able to answer those questions. And, you know, is it possible? Is it a missed opportunity? Should we be meeting, you know, addressing men where they are in substance use treatment? Is it possible? Is it feasible for substance use treatment staff to be trained in intimate partner violence perpetrator programs and to deliver them safely in alcohol and drug treatment settings? Well, we believe with the correct risk and case management in place, alongside integrated support for female partners, that both the advanced programs can be delivered safely by trained staff in alcohol and drug treatment settings. So we have also developed professional training online with support. So it's 30 hours of training for facilitators, 20 for the partner support workers, and we offer integrity support and program management, and we bring together the facilitators and the partner support workers so that they work together. And you can see there are various modules. So there's modules Welcome to Advance, there's a module explaining the training, the risk assessment, the program overview, the content of the sessions and the core content, and then there's certification, which I'll go on to explain, and then access to the materials. So we assess facilitator competencies, so they have to do a risk assessment based on Module 2. They have to do a recorded delivery of parts of the core session, and they have to deliver a coaching call before they're able to get certified to deliver the intervention. And similar for partner support competencies, they have to deliver that first partner call, so they have to record a telephone interview, so they have to approach women, explain why they're doing the study that they're, or why they're contacting them, and then they have to do a later partner support, sort of updating women about their partner's engagement in the study. So there are loads of challenges with addressing intimate partner violence perpetration and victimisation among men and women in substance use treatment settings, but there are also opportunities. This is a group of underserved people who don't necessarily or usually get referred to perpetrator programs, and the existing perpetrator programs don't normally look at domestic abuse or intimate partner violence in the context of substance use or targeted to meet the needs of substance using offenders. The Australian National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children highlights how sectors must work together, and the Unlocking the Prevention Potential document or report makes 21 recommendations across 6 key areas for action by federal, state and territory governments. So there are opportunities, going back to the previous slide, and support to address intimate partner violence perpetration. The Unlocking Prevention Potential report by the Australian Government highlights the link between intimate partner violence and alcohol and drug use, and indeed cites our research. It says, crime statistics show that perpetrators of domestic, family and sexual violence who abuse substances, especially alcohol, are more likely to inflict serious injury, and they also recognise that a high percentage of men attending men's behaviour change programmes also present with substance abuse issues, which can impede their ability to remain engaged in programmes. So again, we could see this as an opportunity to have targeted programmes to better meet the needs of men who use substances and perpetrate or use abusive behaviour, to enable them to change their behaviour and to engage better in perpetrator programs. And it also recommends in Recommendation 11 that the alcohol and drug sector identify both victims and support people who use violence and train staff in adult safeguarding. So going back to the title slide, are we missing an opportunity to address intimate partner violence perpetration in alcohol and drug services? I would say yes, no great surprise there. Perpetrator programs, research and systematic reviews would conclude do reduce abusive behaviour by around 30 to 65%. And one UK evaluation reported a social return on investment of £14 for every £1 spent. So, there could be cost efficiencies if you were delivering the Advanced D programme. It could save money, reduce recidivism, and improve outcomes for perpetrators and victims and survivors. So I've just included on this slide the economic cost of domestic violence in Australia at 22 billion, and the social and economic cost of alcohol in Australia is estimated at $75 billion, and the projected cost of drug use is around 30 billion. So in conclusion, Advanced D provides an additional resource to existing perpetrator service provision, but it serves a population who wouldn't usually meet threshold for other perpetrator programs. The goal is to reduce IPV in the context of substance use for men where alcohol and/or drug use has been identified as a criminogenic need. It's an evidence-based integrated substance use and IPV programme that consolidates learning of the contribution of substance use to men's use of abusive behaviour, and it provides lifetime learning on how to manage risk, triggers, and reduce the risk of IPV in the future. And that cross learning ensures that learning doesn't occur in silos. It can be delivered fully remote. It offers delivery, geographical and language flexibility, cultural tailoring as possible, and it offers the potential for cost benefits or efficiencies. And for more information and to download all of the research that I've been speaking about today, if you go to our website, reduceipv.co.uk, you'll get more information there and also be able to contact us. So thank you for listening. Any questions, please get in touch with myself or Liz.